An all-new season of The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives is now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+.
Mom talk has just been blowing up.
Whitney and Jen are on Dancing with the Stars.
Taylor is a bachelorette.
Saying that out loud is crazy. Like, that is huge.
But all the cool opportunities could pull us apart.
It's causing issues in everyone's marriage.
My whole world is falling apart right now. It's chaos.
Watch the Hulu original series, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I am joined by Ken Katkin, a professor of law at Chase Law School. Ken, it has been far too long since we've been doing the show together.
Yeah, I almost forgot the whole Federalist Papers since the last time we talked. I had to reread them, but it's great to be back.
No, it is true. We've taken a little bit of a hiatus, the two of us. I've been on this show, but you've had a lot of things going on. And so as a result, I continue to release some things on our Substack for listeners about the Federalist Papers. But I had to even go back and think, that was a couple of things ago. I had to get back to that. So I'm excited about that too. So just a reminder, if you want to be a part of those supporters exclusive shows, that's going to mean that you need to become a supporter of the Politics Guys. You'll get access to things like, Ken and I's Substack, or not our Substack, our Federalist Papers show, although you can also follow us on the Substack, and that's going to be in the show notes. But Ken, let's jump in. It's been a busy week. There's a lot of things to get to. Middle Eastern leadership was kind of, redrawn this past week when Mojtaba Khamenei officially ascended to the role of the supreme leader. Now, this wasn't a standard transition, Ken. It's in some ways kind of a coronation in a combat zone. The new leader takes power as the United States faces mounting evidence corroborated by independent analysts that American Tomahawk missile was in fact responsible for a pretty horrific strike on a girls' school that killed over 170 children, although Donald Trump suggested that it could have been anyone's Tomahawk missile. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Meanwhile, while the White House maintains that Iran probably hit its own people, that still brings a new level of Iranian resolve. Meanwhile, today, 6 more Americans were killed, in this case, crew members, during a refueling plane in Iraq in support of the Iranian war effort. Now, meanwhile, back at home in the United States, there's been all kinds of economic shockwaves from the Iranian war, specifically in oil. Right now, for example, the partial closure, now seemingly almost near total closure, of the Strait of Hormuz has sent oil prices on a roller coaster, rattling global brand markets and sparking fears of 2026 becoming the year of stagflation. Meanwhile, in Washington, the debate has sometimes shifted from if we should strike to how we should get out. President Trump has sent mixed messages this past week about the war. Is it effectively over? Is it going to continue, as he suggested to G7 countries, that Iran is on the, quote, verge of surrender? Or is it really a longer-term 5 to 6 week strategy as originally put? As NBC has put it just today, the administration has given, quote, conflicting takes of the operation's goals and language, quote. So, Ken, with no clear endgame in sight and a new vengeful leader in Tehran, the question is not just about military dominance, but also whether this kind of pressure strategy has any kind of off-ramp before we see some pretty big global economic or even regional breaking points. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's a lot of different issues that you raised there around this. I mean,
Just a few.
I mean, I think that you started with sort of the younger Ayatollah Khamenei taking over from his dead father. And I think his mother and also his wife, several of them were killed in those attacks, right? Not just his father. Well, it's obviously the last person in Iran that anyone in the United States was hoping to see take power, right? I mean, it's not who Trump wanted. It's not who I wanted. I don't usually see eye to eye with Trump. So I think, you've got a sort of broad consensus in America. This is not the direction we would like to see Iran going.
But we've ended up pushing it in that direction, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the unbelievable, almost just like in Greenland, where I think if the U.S. would have had an objective of actually somehow gaining more control over Greenland, I think there were paths that could have accomplished that. But threatening a military attack is the one that made sure that couldn't happen, right? And I think here similarly in Iran, a lot of people in Iran were chafing under the Ayatollah's rule. We saw these huge protests and things like that, and I think there were ways, to pull levers to push things in the direction of greater liberalization there, which is I think what most people there wanted. But
we had all of those kind of pressure points occurring in Iran before this, right? We had these massive amounts of massacres that were taking place because of protests from Iranian people.
Yeah, yeah, and there's ways to covertly provide support for those kind of movements and to covertly undermine the regime. But I think like just these full-fledged attacks where the U.S. starts, just indiscriminately killing, mostly civilians. In fact, mostly schoolgirls so far. I think right, many more dead schoolgirls than dead soldiers or militia members. I'm
not sure if that's the case, but I mean, it's certainly been indiscriminate, I think, is the way I might put that.
Well, the current rounds of bombings have I think primarily been in the cities, right? Not even in the last couple of days, ever since Trump said that it's winding down.
I don't have a really good sense, and this is another potential problem. I don't have a very good sense of how much firepower has been put where, but I think it is accurate to say that we have had significant civilian urban populations as part of those strikes. It's hard for me to say, even when I'm looking at it carefully, to say, well, what have we hit? I mean, we've also hit ships. We've hit, military bases, theoretically, some of those, what were already obliterated nuclear facilities, depending on what you thought had happened before.
Point taken. I might have been a little too confident in what I was saying, and I think you're right to question that. But certainly, I think the people of Iran, by and large, by now, are probably more worried about the U.S. invasion. Yeah, about us. Yeah, we've become the great Satan again, right? And not their own Ayatollah.
It is strange, and I'm curious if you have a thought about this. It seems very strange to me. That's why I like kind of the history of this. We have Iranian protests happening in these urban areas, and now we're particularly striking the areas that were protest centers, which means that you're attacking the very people that President Donald Trump, right prior to the attack, said, oh, we're going to get your back, we're coming. And even if he meant that in a military way, I can't figure out the military strategy that suggests hitting those urban areas that seemingly were on the liberalization. I mean, again, not all the way to the United States, but some kind of liberalization side makes any sense. Is this just complete madness, or there's any kind of strategy here, Ken?
Yeah, I would say there was a stupid strategy here. I don't think it's random, but I think the stupid strategy was thinking that Iran was Venezuela, right? So in Venezuela, look, they killed the dictator. They quickly made a deal with the dictator's regime. We'll be happy if you stay in and we get to pull the strings. And the dictator's regime went along with that. And I think Trump was just, we could do that. And just exactly what we just did in Venezuela. We can do that in Iran. And I think, I think that was the strategy. And I think that was just a stupid strategy because it doesn't take any account of, how big of a country Iran is, how strong of a grip the current regime had on Iran, how much skepticism there is in the whole population there about the United States, even among
the liberals,
right? Yeah. There's a lot of people there who didn't like the Ayatollah, but they were dubious about the United States, and then the United States proved all their worst fears, right? And so now they're kind of unified against the United States, and so that's how I read it. Do you read the strategy any differently than that?
I don't. In all honesty, it reads to me like somebody who needed to take a intro to comparative politics class and just have a basic understanding of the work of Iran, right? So although they do have a supreme leader, one of the mistakes is assuming Iran doesn't have just a singular kind of dictatorial figure. They also have the assembly of experts who pulls some additional of those strings, even including who gets to run in the for what they call their General Assembly. And so the idea is going to be a little bit different here. So if you have a singular dictator who's controlling things and you take them out, that makes a different kind of post war effect than when you know that you've got this body that it can appoint somebody else, which they did, which would mean if you really wanted to do this, you need to go both after I'm not suggesting we ought to have done this, but you need to not just go after the supreme leader, but you had to think about the assembly of experts. And it appears that just nobody seemingly understood that basic fact about how the state of Iran worked.
Yeah, or another thing I think, the military planners, knew that, the Strait of Hormuz could be closed and, you need to kind of plan for that. But it seems like the civilian leadership of the Pentagon was just so sure that just the same way Venezuela more or less capitulated in a couple days, that Iran would also capitulate in a couple days. And so there's no real need to, think about an actual military plan to keep the strait open. And it seems like they totally didn't do it.
On another thing, it seems weird to me, kind of moving to the Iranian side, their response has also seemed kind of strange to me. I mean, their response seems to have been, okay, we've been attacked by Israel and the United States, and so now our goal is going to be to strike at, I don't know, everything that might exist anywhere. That seems also like an unusual strategy to me, and I haven't quite had an answer for that. Why? I mean, you think you'd want to be targeting, and again, I'm not trying to give aid to the enemy, but
Right.
their response seems even more irrational than I would have expected, because oftentimes when it comes to more authoritarian regimes, you have the ability to be a little bit more militarily laser focused.
Yeah, well,
And
I don't think
instead,
it
it
was.
seems like we kind of have a rando response in some ways.
Yeah, I agree with you. It was not a good response. I don't think it was an irrational response. I think they had a reason for it, and then they realized that it wasn't the good response. But I think the reason was these are the countries that have U.S. bases in them, right? And the countries that have U.S. bases, the reason those countries have those bases is that they think it makes them safer to have them. Right. So you have all these Persian Gulf countries that primarily were worried about Iran and primarily thought, if we have U.S. bases here, we'll be safe from Iran. So I think, with that understanding, the Iranian first response was to think, let's show these guys that having these bases there doesn't make them safer. It actually makes them less safe because it's going to attract missile fire from us because they have the U.S. bases that they wouldn't have faced that otherwise. And so I think that was their initial strategy. But then I think they did back down on it because I think first of all,
verbally they did, but it doesn't appear that they've yet actually stopped some of those hits.
No, they're continuing primarily on Turkey, I guess, right? Is that the one they're continuing?
Yeah, we've had
on?
there's been two different interceptions by NATO of missiles towards Turkey specifically, yes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because they're trying to cause trouble within NATO, right? I think they can already see that most of the NATO countries have a lot of doubts about Trump. Most of the NATO countries want nothing to do with this war. It would be a big political problem in most of the NATO countries if those countries got involved in this war. And so I think the attacks on Turkey in particular are because it's in NATO and because they think that will cause political problems in the Western European NATO countries. So I think that's why they're persisting there. I think that they, I think with the other Gulf countries, though, they made their point with those early strikes, but then I think they actually don't want those countries to be in favor of the U.S. continuing. I think they'd rather have those countries in favor of putting pressure on the U.S. All right, enough, get out, right? And so I think if they would just continue bombing Saudi Arabia and Oman and UAE and these countries, then those countries are going to be like, we actually need the U.S. to stay here and keep fighting this, And so I think that's why
it's almost as if Iran is committing the same mistake in reverse that the United States was committing in some ways in the initiation of the war.
And I think that's why they largely cut back on that afterwards. Yeah.
So we're not going to completely pivot from this, but on the domestic side of these decisions, one of the things that has come out has been what was going on in terms of what might be called the Kushner Doctrine, right? So it's now kind of clear that the decision-making process for the recent strikes and the strategy for escalating the conflict in the Strait of Hormuz was really being run through kind of an unconventional shadow diplomatic track. And not just in Iran, we have to talk briefly for a moment additionally that today, on Friday, Cuban leader Miguel Diaz-Canel confirmed that there were ongoing talks with the United States in the hopes of moving away from a third, location around the world kind of confrontation with the United States, but also confirming the earlier reports that Trump is, and in fact was considering moving to Cuba next after Venezuela and Iran. And so Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, acting as special envoys, who kind of effectively, seemingly sidelined the State Department and the Pentagon. Supporters have been calling this a necessary bypass of a slow-moving bureaucracy, arguing that disruptive diplomacy is really the only way to really combat things like the Iranian dynasty. But what do you think about this idea? We're now in this regional war, no clear exit strategy, and it seems to be a Kushner-led effort, and maybe there's something happening with Cuba. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, let me take those separately from each other.
Please.
I do think that Trump's primary reasons are mostly related to domestic politics and not to international affairs. I continue to think that, his top two objectives for what he's trying to accomplish in Iran, number one, get the Epstein story out of the headlines. Number two, find yet another way to help Russia. Right. And so I think those two objectives he's mostly succeeded in. So to him, this is a big success. Congressman Massey is out there valiantly trying to keep the Epstein story in the headlines and to bring anti-war powers resolution. But, by and large, even while some of the biggest disclosures from the Epstein files have happened since the Iran war started, that hasn't been, dominating the public attention the way the war has. And, not only did he succeed in driving the world oil price up over $100 a barrel again, but, he took off all the sanctions on Russia. So Russia is this, huge beneficiary of all that, the world's clearest beneficiary of the current Iran war.
I want to highlight that because I think listeners might not have heard you clearly because this has not gotten a lot of airtime. We've talked about a few things that haven't. But yeah. The oil tariffs that we had predating even Trump are now removed, and because to try to release this pressure. But of course, we were looking at this. Neither that nor the release of strategic reserves amounts to more than hours worth of the normal requirements of what goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And so a few students and others have been asking me about this. I said, it's kind of like this. It's kind of like you're you're losing dollars out the back of your car because it's blowing out the window. And in response, somebody goes, well, here, I'm going to give you a couple of pennies and that'll reimburse that. Right.
Right. I mean, Russia isn't really going to be able to supply enough oil to the world to nearly make up for the oil that can't move through the Strait of Hormuz. But Russia is going to get the benefit of both having these newly high oil prices that they can sell at and not having sanctions or tariffs against them when they sell it.
A high price.
At this new high price. So Russia gets this huge infusion of resources, which it can use to prosecute its attack on Ukraine, and the U.S. is kind of totally distracted from even not that Trump wanted to help Ukraine that much, but now
I was going to say I think distracted would assume that there was a chance.
Not that he wanted to help them, but there was some public attention to that matter. So there was always some public pressure.
That kind of distraction.
There was some public pressure, and some congressional pressure even, before the Iran war, trying to get him to provide more help to Ukraine. And that's completely gone away. Nobody even mentions the word Ukraine anymore. So I think if his objectives were, helping Russia, driving Epstein out of the headlines, he's accomplished all of his objectives. And I really do think those were all of his objectives. I don't think he had any kind of plan for Iran. You couldn't possibly have a plan for regime change if you're not going to put a massive deployment of troops on the ground. You can bomb a country back to the Stone Age, but there's literally no way you could dictate who's going to be in charge there unless you're going to get on the ground and install somebody in charge there. And he's not even thinking about doing that, I don't think.
Well, to pivot you back for a second, because I think you really kind of summed up that well, what about this move to having, again, the justification, the intelligence justification for going into Iran doesn't come from the CIA. It doesn't come from the department. It comes from private intelligence vetted by the Kushner team. What do you think about that?
Well, even there, it's not even like it's not even like they say that Iran was that close to, being any kind of threat to the United States. I mean, even the Kushner / Witkoff version of intelligence is what it is, still says that there was that we delivered a substantial setback to the Iranian nuclear program with the bombing last year, and that that they may have had some. I think the way they put it is they were motivated to try to restart that program so that there may, in the future, they may get somewhere with that program, but even they weren't saying that they're anywhere with that program right now, right? So I don't even know, even calling it intelligence it's just a theory about what Iran's going to try to do in the future.
What are your last kind of thoughts on this issue? And I want to kind of ask a very specific question of you. You had mentioned it a second ago. If you're going to try to have any kind of regime change, that's going to require boots on the ground. What's the likelihood you think that we see this ramp up? Or, as you noted a second ago, have we already met the strategies of President Trump, and therefore do you agree that he really is going to just kind of continue at this level for X amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, he talked about unconditional surrender. He's going to unconditionally surrender, right? I mean, Iran is going to, this is probably the earliest that the U.S. has lost most of its post-World War II wars. I think it's maybe, you could say it won the 1991 Persian Gulf War, where the objective was to expel Iraq from Kuwait, and we succeeded in doing that. I'd call that one a victory. Yeah.
You could even make a case, although not everybody's going to agree with that we ought to have done it. There is a different kind of regime in Iraq. So there's a sense in which George W. Bush's...
that's the one I was going to say. That one I was going to actually say something like what you said. I agree. We won the military phase of that war. That's what I would say. But I think we won the military phase of the war, but then we actually, I would say, lost the subsequent, the post-military phase of the war.
Well, they do actually have a relatively different kind of regime. I would almost give them a partial victory on that one in a way that I wouldn't for, say, Afghanistan.
Well, let me put it this
Afghanistan, you go right back to having the Taliban as being
if you had to choose for tourism purposes, if you had to choose between being a tourist and visiting Vietnam today, or being a tourist and visiting Iraq today, which country would you feel more comfortable to go to?
I guess it would depend. If you mean me specifically, I would say Vietnam.
Yeah, me too. I think most
because I'm an
Americans
American
would say that.
citizen, but I'm not sure that would hold true for, say, a British person.
Maybe, but I think even though we clearly lost the war in Vietnam, it's a more friendly place to go today, right? That the regime that's in Vietnam today, the one that defeated us, is not as anti-American. Whereas I think in Iraq, I don't think that's a place Americans are going to do business. I don't think that's a place Americans are going to do tourism. I think that's a place where, it's not Saddam Hussein in charge anymore. It's different. I agree with you about all that, but it's not specifically better by American standards. I think.
Although a piece of that could also be time, but your point is still well taken on that front.
Yeah, and I agree. Maybe Iraq will be better if, because Vietnam, that war was 50 years ago. Iraq, that was only 25 years ago. But so that could be true. I take that point too. But I just generally don't see that the U.S. gained very much, even by winning the military phase of the war there. And in Vietnam and Afghanistan, we lost the military phase of the war. But I think
it doesn't distract from your overall point, which is going to say we haven't done well in post-war. Maybe we have 2, maybe we have 1.5, right? However you want to look at that. So,
Yeah. So I think here, it's more clear earlier that we can't, it's not clear yet whether we could win or lose a military phase of this war, but I think we could lose it. But I think it's, even if we win it, it's completely clear already that we've lost the peace already, even if we win the war, that there's no chance that any objectives that benefit America could come. And I, what I actually think is that if you ask for prediction, the right now, the same reasons that caused Trump to go there, keeping Epstein out of the news and benefiting Putin, those aren't changing right away. Like, as long as we stay there, that will keep Epstein out of the news and that will benefit Putin. So I think that there's not going to be any quick exit. But what I think the exit will be is we haven't even seen the beginning of the oil shocks yet because, the world's supply of oil that already made it through that Strait of Hormuz has not been exhausted yet, right? We're not in the phase yet where, oil is coming out of the wells and is literally not getting anywhere. But when that happens, the price probably needs to go up by very, very considerably more because the only way a shortage like that gets resolved is when the price goes up enough that people actually stop consuming as much, right? And, like if you look at how far the price has gone up now, people are annoyed that, gas went from $2.50 a gallon to $3.50 a gallon in 2 weeks, but very few people are pumping less gas because of that, right? Most people are still pumping the same amount of gas. So I think the price will go up probably when it gets over $4.50 or $5. That's what's going to really cause Trump to have to wind things down. And that might happen in just another couple weeks, but I kind of think that's what's going to do it.
Okay. Well, before we get to our next story, I have a brief message. So here's what I want to talk about. When my gut is off, everything feels off. Digestion, energy, mood, even focus. Every day, your gut is fighting a silent war against processed foods, stress, and even just toxins in the air. And when your gut struggles, your whole body feels it. Most probiotics never actually make it to your gut alive, which is why they can't work. But Just Thrive is clinically proven to arrive 100% alive and deliver measurable results. Just Thrive turns your gut into an antioxidant factory, creating protective compounds exactly where you need them most. That means benefits like better digestion, healthy immunity, more energy, and easier weight management. Just Thrive Probiotic comes in capsules or berry-flavored gummies, so there's an option for everyone in the family. For over a decade, Just Thrive has been helping thousands of people take control of their health with science-backed solutions you can trust. From their award-winning probiotic to their full line of gut, immune, and brain health supplements, Just Thrive is ready to help you live your healthiest life. You can try Just Thrive Probiotics for 90 days risk-free, and you can save 20% on your first order with the code CX. See the difference for yourself or get a full product refund, no questions asked. Take the 90-day Just Thrive Probiotic Challenge today at justthrivehealth.com/CX. Be the best you with Just Thrive. So, Ken, we want to pivot a little bit to some terrorist attacks in the United States. We have some pretty terrifying plots being foiled and not foiled much closer to the home. This week, federal authorities charged 2 Pennsylvania men with an attempted ICE-inspired bombing outside Gracie Mansion in New York City. The suspects allegedly were targeting a crowd with what's called a Mother of Satan explosive device. It's the same volatile material that was used in the Manchester Arena bombing. And this isn't just an isolated criminal act. It's potentially a reminder of how international conflict could ignite some kinds of radicalization. The FBI has warned of potential Iranian retaliation on American soil. To be very clear, we have no idea at this juncture if there's any kind of connections, but there could be. Now, additionally, this past Thursday, tragedy struck at Norfolk, Virginia, as a gunman opened fire inside the business school at Old Dominion University. 1 person is dead, but the toll could have been a lot higher if not for the actions of ROTC students who engaged and killed the shooter within 10 minutes. The FBI is now actively investigating this as an act of terrorism. The gunman was a known ISIS sympathizer who had previously served time for aiding the terrorist group. And this raises kind of a daunting question for the administration. How is a man with a documented history of radicalization able to carry out an attack while under federal supervision? And it's something that combines our story of the war on terror with the war on home. So, Ken, what are your thoughts about these attacks? What's the likelihood that they are connected to Iran? And to what extent is this just happen chance?
Yeah, it's really hard to know. I mean, I will say that the fact that the West Bloomfield, Michigan synagogue attack and the shooting at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia took place, I think, within an hour or two of each other. Right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they took place so close in time to each other. It does kind of have that echo of like September 11th, right? When there's like attacks in different places, but at the same time. And so to me, it felt like that would be the thing that would make me start thinking, is this some kind of coordinated act of terrorism? Because you've got, different acts of terrorism unfolding 1,000 miles apart from each other, maybe not quite that far, but, at the same time, and it's, similar, and these lone wolf attacks, and just like the planes, getting hijacked, and some are going to be crashed into the Pentagon and some into the World Trade Center. And so it sort of had that feel, but so far we don't have any evidence really. They have identified who all the individuals were, I guess, but they haven't been able to connect them up. I think I saw that some reporting today was saying that the West Bloomfield synagogue terrorist, who, it had been reported yesterday that he was a U.S. citizen who immigrated here from Lebanon just a few years ago. I had saw it reported today that his brothers and his mother in Lebanon were killed by the Israeli missile strikes this month, and that the brothers may have been active in Hezbollah. And so that sort of suggests different range of motives, right? Just ranging from like he was just so despondent and aggrieved that Israel attacked and killed his family, that alone motivated him to try to lash out as best he could against Israel, which, for him where he was in Michigan would mean against a synagogue, I guess. Or, it could be that he was also involved with Hezbollah, and so there was some coordination here. So it's hard to kind of sort out, what could be the right answer there, and see what happens. It does sort of feel like that this upswing since the beginning of we have these other attacks. Even you mentioned the New York City one, and then I think there was a mass shooting in Austin a week or two ago, right after the beginning.
Yes, the host took it on a couple weeks ago now.
Yeah, and that also at the time was portrayed as an act of Islamic terrorism, but it's hard to know if these are all coordinated responses. I'm sure that in the Middle East, everything that the U.S. and Israel is doing right now would be perceived as terrorism. And I have to say, I somewhat share that perspective. I think the undeclared war where we're just rampantly killing civilians in Iran, I think I would call it terrorism also. So I think, you could certainly see how people who live there would consider that to be terrorism, and they would want to respond.
I would call it a war crime, but I hear what you're getting at in terms of like a popular conversation. And it certainly, no matter how we're going to label it more specifically, it's certainly the wrong thing to be doing, whether it falls into the act of a state engaging in a war crime or a conflict crime, depending on what we want to think about here, and terrorism. But again, I think your point is still well taken.
Yeah, that it's the kind of thing that inspires organized terroristic responses, especially because of the asymmetry and strength, right? That the U.S. is so much stronger than Iran, that Iran can probably only respond that
So
way.
one of the things this has led me to thinking about, and I know I'm not the only one, but do you think these kinds of incidents maybe bring a different kind of light to what's happening in the Senate over the DHS shutdown? So for example, in the case of the Lone Wolf, what's sometimes called our BioWatch system and our other counterterrorism units are currently furloughed. And so this could be one of the reasons these are making it through in a way we don't see. Is this something... I recognize I was very sympathetic to what was happening in the Senate, especially in terms of what was happening in Minnesota. Do Democrats need to maybe rethink this?
I wouldn't. They may think they need to, and they'll do that based on the polling that they do, I guess. But just in terms of what I think is the right thing to do, I think the right thing to do for Democrats, I'm not saying I know whether this is the politic thing to do, but it would be to continue the shutdown, because the reason I think that if you had a well-functioning administration and a well-functioning Homeland Security Department, then I think they could contribute to protecting the safety of Americans against these kind of attacks. I basically do think, especially the one at Old Dominion, where the shooter was someone that had just come out of serving a 10-year prison term for being involved.
He would have been on that system for sure.
Yeah,
right?
for
There's
sure.
no
Right.
question.
It was an incredibly easily preventable attack. He's the kind of person that should have been monitored a lot, and a normal administration would have prevented it. But I think if you ask, why, what was the reason it wasn't prevented? Was that because Congress hasn't funded the Homeland Security Department, or was that because even if the Homeland Security was fully funded, their priorities are elsewhere, and their competence has been gutted. I
I
think the latter
hear
answer
that,
is
but
much more likely.
it is hard. I think it's very difficult to suggest when all of those units are furloughed to suggest that there would not have been some kind of measurable difference between with them being active and with them being furloughed. And to be honest with you, if your hypothesis there is correct, if we could have an administration in which even at that kind of level, and that's pretty low. By low, I don't mean unimportant, but I mean in the hierarchical structure of things, relatively low, independent. If we really don't think that those can operate, wouldn't that really be an indication that we ought not to have them? I mean, you're
Yeah,
almost kind
well,
of making a
that's what I think.
libertarian
Yeah,
argument at that
the
point.
that's why I think a shutdown of ICE and CPE is necessary. And I don't even know that all the people in counterterrorism and counterintelligence were actually furloughed. They would be essential workers, so they wouldn't be getting paid. But I think we're only 2-3 weeks into this shutdown now. Most essential workers are still working, so yeah, some of them may not be showing up for work because
So
they're
I
not
meant
getting paid.
specifically, just to be clear, because
Yeah,
I had looked at this a little bit, the ones who would have been doing the you get out of jail, or sometimes called BioWatch,
yeah,
those are in fact furloughed. They are not currently
working.
working without
Yeah,
pay.
yeah.
Now
So
again, I don't
yeah,
mean all of them,
yeah.
so that's a fair point that you're making there, but just to be
Y
clear.
Yeah, but I think the American people, even after these handful of terrorist attacks, the shooter in Old Dominion did succeed in killing someone, but ICE forces in Minneapolis succeeded in killing a couple of people. And, there was prior to that a similar ICE shooting in Austin that was covered up for a while, but has come out. And, so I think that the ICE, unless it's reformed, it's at least as much of a threat to the American people as foreign terrorism is right now. And the role of the Department of Homeland Security is a bit redundant to the role of the FBI and military intelligence and other agencies like that. And so I think that it's really the Trump administration that should be blamed, and not the Democratic senators. If the Trump administration say it's more important to them that they be able to maintain the ability to have an American Gestapo that can wear masks and kill people, than it is to just give up on that demand for now and reach
No,
an agreement to
I,
protect the homeland again.
they
I
should.
think that's on the Trump administration.
Now, I'll be honest. I tend your way. Mike and I took this on more head on when it came to DHS, and we actually had a pretty heated exchange because he vehemently disagreed with me. He thought the Democrats were shooting for pie in the sky. I said things like we got to unmask ICE agents, and he laughed. And he's like, that's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. Yeah, he took the normative other position. So it kind of makes me wonder if even a guy like Mike is saying this is not going to happen. Do you mean I recognize we don't always see eye to eye
Yeah.
on everything but on this one, I think we're really close together, but we might be very different than many of our other hosts. Do you think that are we, I know, I guess what I'm asking you is, are we the minority or are they? What do you
Yeah,
think?
that's the part I don't know. I mean, I feel more confident saying, as I just did, what I think is the right way to think about this. I feel less confident saying, where are the American people on this? And I really don't know. I don't have a Democratic senator. I only have Republican senators. But if Sherrod Brown would somehow get elected and come in while this shutdown is still on, I would be encouraging him to continue the shutdown. I am more afraid personally of an American Gestapo coming to my community and killing people than I am of Islamic terrorism in my community right now. And I'm also, thinking that if there is Islamic terrorism that could come to my community, I'm satisfied that the FBI and that the State Bureau of Investigation and other agencies like that, military intelligence, can probably do as well without assistance from Mark Wayne Mullins' Department of Homeland Security than with it. I don't really think. I think most of the expertise. And remember, one part of this we didn't talk about. There was a political purge of everybody who worked in the FBI or in the Homeland Security on the Mar-a-Lago documents case. And so that's like a lot of the same people that would be responsible for counterintelligence and things like that. The sort of career expertise that was actually inside these agencies, who touches the national security material stuff. There was a big political purge of that. And so I think we're talking about an agency that has already said, well, really what everybody should be doing is out there terrorizing immigrants. And we don't really care if we have the right expertise in counterintelligence and things like that. And so fully funded, that doesn't really change. So that's why I think there's not really much loss here if it's not funded.
I hear that. And I would add just one element, maybe going a level further. I think it has also normalized it for other American groups who were already tending to have kind of those racist tendencies to be radical in a way. And I see that occurring even like here in Oklahoma. But let's move us forward, I think, to another story, Ken. So President Trump this past week kind of dropped a domestic bombshell that, I think it's going to reshape the 2026 midterm landscape. So it's not just the Iranian conflict. It's not just gas prices. He has also made a legislative demand. President Trump has issued a total legislative ultimatum, no signature on any bills until Congress passes the Save America Act, although he seemingly has carved out an exception for DHS funding. Now, writing on Truth Social this past Sunday, he said, quote, "I, as president, will not sign another bill until this passes," end quote. Again, he had a little bit of an exception for the DHS funding. This has also led to a push to change the rules in the Senate that required 60 votes to advance most legislation. Now, Senate Majority Leader John Thune has been reluctant to take such a step, and he has repeatedly said that the bill doesn't have the votes in the Senate and that it has led some segments of MAGA to even call him a traitor. The one thing that I've said all along, and here's him talking, he says, quote, "The one thing I've said all along is, and I've told him and others," referring to Trump, "that I can't guarantee an outcome," end quote, Thune said. He would go on to say, "I can't guarantee a result. If the result is only achieved by nuking the legislative filibuster, we don't have the votes to do that. And so that's just not a realistic option," end quote. But this isn't just even, the SAVE Act is not even just a voting bill anymore, Ken. It folds in bans on transgender health care and sports participation. And really, the president's turned this into a legislative dispute, into kind of a mandatory platform for every Republican candidate in the race to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene. And in the wake of Steve Daines' retirement, candidates are no longer just running on those kinds of issues. They're being forced to choose between total alignment with President Trump's all-or-nothing tactics or being labeled a rhino. As you put it already, President Trump this past week was in Hebron, Kentucky, going after Republican Representative Massey, who again has voted with Trump 97.5% of the time. And that's not just me making up a number. I believe I was taking a look at this. That is, as the last time I looked, the actual legislative connection between Massey and Trump. So we're not talking about somebody who's way off to the far. What do you think about this? Do you think this all or nothing rhino is a move that's going to be successful, or is this just the floundering of the Trump administration trying to get its last 2 years of something?
Yeah, well, this is the regime change thing again. Right? This is another. I tie it to the other story. It's Trump has demanded unconditional surrender, and he's the one that's going to have to unconditionally surrender, right? That you've got in Iran, I think the younger Khamenei, his regime is there to stay, and even if he gets killed, it'll just be someone else from his regime that's in there. But here, I think Trump, recognizes that the elections here are an existential threat to his regime. And so he's got to, he's faced with the existential threat that, his party can't win. He can't really run again, but his successor can't win. And so he's trying to rig the election through this vote that's more important to him than any substantive issue. Now, I don't think that
take on
work.
that, because I hear you, and I'm not suggesting if you weren't trying to pass this, it wouldn't in fact be a way of potentially rigging it. I don't think the Trump administration, it's always dicey trying to predict on Trump. But I don't think the broad stroke strategy is to actually pass the SAVE Act. I think the broad stroke strategy is to have grounds to claim that the reason that they lose at least the House is because they didn't pass the SAVE Act, and see all those tricky, evil immigrants along with their Democratic co-conspirators. They brought all these people into the ballot box. That's why we lost. There's obviously, had we passed the SAVE Act, I don't think it's about really getting it passed. I think it's about having that. What do you think about that?
I think that's a terrific point, and it's probably right. But I would say that my only reservation about fully embracing it is that I don't think that explains why he's working so hard and leveraging so much pressure to actually end the Senate filibuster rule. Because if his goal wasn't really to pass it, but just to be able to complain that he was cheated when it doesn't pass, he wouldn't be. There's not a motive there to really play such hardball to try to get it passed.
Well, doesn't that then mean it's the same reason he has issue with Massey? It's a chance to recognize who the real MAGA Republicans are. Who's going to be willing to actually fall on the sword? Because if anybody's not the one who should fall on the sword, it's never President Trump.
Yeah, that he's just establishing dominance over other Republicans. Maybe that's right. I think it's interesting because I think that he's already talking about an intermediate position, and other Republicans are talking about it, where it's not either keep the filibuster or get rid of the filibuster, but it's have a talking filibuster, right? And so if they retreat to having a talking filibuster, I don't really see how that benefits the Republicans, because the Dems probably will be able to maintain it, and they could just go up there and talk all day, every day about Epstein, and there will be nothing else discussed in the Senate for the rest of the term.
Theoretically, and this is a little bit of my expertise here, I mean, the way that they would have a ton of time to be able to do that. However, if you were to actually invoke the filibuster rule, for a while you can pass the floor back and forth. But eventually, after you hit a particular hour mark, one particular Democratic senator would then have to hold the floor. Probably if you were going to do it, you'd put it in the hands of Cory Booker, who does currently have the longest historical one. And, let's see if he can go for 14 hours or whatever. But at some point, if you do that, what happens is you can then do cloture, which means that when Cory Booker would either attempt to pass that or sat down, i.e. couldn't continue, you could then move for the vote of cloture. And you can't do that instantaneously. You have to have it's a pretty long period of time. The Senate doesn't generally do that, though, because they don't want to waste all the time with it. But you're not wrong. I mean, I'd have to look at the details, because you're getting deep into the Senate rules that are generally not used. But I think they would have somewhere in the vicinity of 48 hours before they would have to move over. It's either 48 or 36 before they'd have to move over to this, holding it for as long as they could with one person. So, I mean, I could imagine you could almost have 4-ish days of talking about whatever you want, like you're saying right there.
Yeah, and I think it would be Jeffrey Epstein primarily.
You might just read straight from the documents, right?
Yeah, and that would be televised, and there'd be a lot of attention to it. And and I think it would be. And I don't know even if you get cloture, because I think there may be some senators, some Republican senators who wouldn't even vote for cloture then, because you're still back to the same kind of thing as. I guess right now you need 60, and you're saying it would drop to 50 at a certain point.
Well, that's theoretically the 60 in the past for cloture is required, because that's what it takes to end the debate. But if they're going to change those rules, the cloture vote would then move to 50 if you were doing a talking filibuster. Yeah. Now that would require a change of the rules, but
right, which they would have to invoke the nuclear option to do that, because a change of the rules requires.
It would be kind of like a regional nuclear option, because you wouldn't be getting rid of the filibuster in its totality. You'd be getting rid of it temporarily, but you're not wrong.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of difficulties down that road, and also I tend to think that really a significant number of Republican senators don't want to get rid of the filibuster rule for a couple of reasons. One, the more obvious one is that it generally serves Republicans more than it serves Democrats to have that rule. And really, I'll be honest. I mean, when Biden was president, I was a voice for getting rid of the filibuster rule. So I don't.
We talked about it on the show frequently, as a matter of fact.
I don't think there's anything great about the filibuster rule. It wouldn't even bother me that much. I don't want to see the SAVE Act passed, but it wouldn't bother me that much if the Republicans actually got rid of it, because I think a world without the filibuster rule works better for Democrats than Republicans, because the current exceptions are for judicial nominations and tax cuts. Those are not filibusterable.
So here's an interesting question that I've thought about on that front, right?
Yeah.
So if your analysis is right, and I think there's reason to think you could be right there, why don't some Republicans say, hey, you know what? Democrats. Why don't some Senate Democrats say, hey, you know what? We're with you. We will support we'll support ending the filibuster so that you can pass your SAFE Act.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately, I think Democrats will go in that direction when they have the White House, or even when they have the majority in the.
If they don't
Senate.
do it here, I don't think they're going to do it then. I don't think Democrats really want to cross that Rubicon, to be honest.
Well, no, it's different if you're going to lose everything. If right now the timing would be such that if there was no filibuster rule, the Republicans could do whatever they want because they have majorities.
But if they were going to do that, why wouldn't they have done it back when Biden? I don't disagree with your analysis. And
no,
they
I
could
think
have
the
done
problem
it then
when
and
Biden
they
was
didn't.
president, I think 48 or 49 of them were ready to do it when Biden was president. The big problem they had was Sinema and Manchin. And Sinema and Manchin are not in there anymore, and they didn't have a majority.
I think it was more, as I recall, I'd have to go back and look, so I'm not going to say that. I'm not positive.
There were a number of Democratic senators who never said one way or the other what.
That's fair, too.
But Sinema and Manchin said, we will not end the filibuster. And so without those two votes, it wasn't possible. But many, many more senators who said which side they were on, other than those two, they all said they wanted to end the filibuster. And I think the Dems might go ahead and do it. And I think that's a standard argument that Trump is making right now, right? Trump is saying as soon as the Dems have the majority, they'll do it. And I think that could be true. I don't think that's necessarily untrue, but I think the Dems would strategically wait until they actually have the House and the Senate and the White House so that they can pass legislation. But that is what Trump has now, right? And so, so I don't think he's wrong about that, but I don't think the Dems want to support it right now just purely for strategic reasons, that they don't want to give Trump the ability to pass whatever he wants. But I think they'd accept it, that if they're thinking like one day, we're going to have majorities in this House and the Senate and the White House. And then, that day, we'll bring in Puerto Rico as a state. We'll bring in Washington, D.C. as 4 states. We'll let Northeast and Northwest and Southeast and Southwest each be a state. The Democrats could do a lot of things like that if there was no filibuster. And so I think generally, the Democrats want to do more active things with the government, and the Republicans can filibuster that. And the Republicans generally, their primary thing is not to do too much except for tax cuts and judicial appointments. And they already have filibuster exceptions for that.
Maybe I think some of that's changing in a world in which you have kind of the MAGA who want to do more active things
maybe
in a way
that's
that's
right.
kind of anti-conservative. But I
I
understand and
agree with
take
you
your
there,
point.
too.
But we don't have a lot of time, but I do want to get to one last story, Ken, but we'll want to keep it a little bit briefer. And that's the ongoing DHS shutdown. There's probably not a ton to talk about here. We've already kind of rolled into some things. But, we are here on about a month. And this has really moved into kind of this power of the purse question. We were talking about just a little bit of that in terms of the units dealing with terrorism, but there is in fact 250,000 federal employees, from TSA agents to Border Patrol, who are working without a paycheck. What do you think happens moving forward? Just kind of a quick, overall take. How much longer do you think DHS remains shut down?
Yeah, well, I think I gave my answer before that I don't think they need to reopen it. I would keep it all shut down until the end of the year.
Well, you said you kind of hedged, and that's why I wanted to finish with this, which was you had said you thought the right thing to do was they should move it forward, but you weren't sure about the political thing.
I'm
so
still
what
not
do you
sure
think?
about the political. And I really can't make a prediction about that, because I feel like a lot of Dems are thinking about this probably the way I am, but yet, a lot of Dems also like to fly on airplanes and things like that, and so, I think there is going to get to be a point where the disruptions are severely unsustainable. But I do think, all I can say is I think the right thing to do is to throw that all back on Trump and say, look, if you want a TSA bill, we'll pass a TSA bill today. If you want a FEMA bill, we'll pass a FEMA bill today. If you want to keep all these agencies shut down so that the Gestapo can keep wearing masks, we're not the ones that are keeping the government shut down. You're the one keeping the government shut down.
Okay. Well, Ken, I'm going to pause this there. It's been great to do it, but we're not completely done because we're going to finally get back to the Federalist Papers here in just a few minutes. And we're going to get into John Jay's papers, which is, listen, that's a whole lot of fun all the way around. I'd love for everybody who's listening to join us on that show. But to do that, you're going to become a supporter of the Politics Guys. It just takes a few minutes. And all you got to do is head down to the show notes or head to politicsguys.com/support. Again, the easiest thing is just to head to the show notes. You're also going to see the Substack there for the Politics Guys Federalist Papers. That's what I've been writing on. It's been a lot of fun to do that. I've enjoyed that. But you're also going to get access to not just those shows. You're going to get access to Justin and mine shows where we're going through contemporary political ideologies. You're also going to get access to things like our original Constitution shows, which have been coming out on the Wednesdays as well. There's just so much coming out if you are a supporter. So head to politicsguys.com/support or head down to the show notes. Now, I know for some people that you're just not in a financial position to be able to support the show and you'd like to get those supporters exclusive shows. It is possible. Just reach out to us at mail@politicsguys.com so that we can make that a possibility. If you are listening right now, it's a huge thing if you will subscribe, rate, and review. We got so much coming at you. If you're not subscribed, you're not going to see all those things coming out through the week, some of which are available to everyone, like those Constitution shows. So please do that now. Also, share these episodes and talk about them on the social media channel of your choice. I finish, as always, by thanking our executive producers, which blows me away every time. And here they are. We have Wilmer Moreno. We've got Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, Jody Marie Miller, and Sean Fugit. We'll be back with a new full show next weekend. I hope you'll join us then.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.